I'd like to take a moment to share with you a solid conversation that I had with a new client couple. It's my hope that what I shared with them is a help to you the way it was to them. It is a married couple. She is 37. He is 38. They are the parents of one son. They've been married for 4 years, and she came to me and said, Doc, I'm coming to you because I found your work and I shared your work with my husband and thought that maybe you could help us. He is what I call the shutdown king. He will not talk. I said, what do you mean he doesn't talk? She said, well, he's just not willing to accept accountability and responsibility for the challenges in the relationship that we have. And not only will he not accept accountability and responsibility, specifically, he won't accept accountability and responsibilities for the challenges he's caused. I said, in what way? She said, well, number one, just minimum acknowledgement that he's the fault or at fault for whatever has occurred. But more than that, that would be sufficient for me. But he won't even do that. He literally will say to me, I'm not talking about this. I don't want to talk about it. You're not going to make me talk about it. I said, he doesn't say anything at all. She said, no, sir. He's sitting there on the call. I said, sir, is that true? You don't say anything at all? He said, it's not that I don't say anything at all, but I have said to her on several occasions when we've had several arguments where that's just not something I want to talk about. I said, so you've actually come out and said that? He said, yes, sir. She said then and jumped in and said, well, he seems annoyed and extremely agitated all the time when we have to address these challenging things. And he just seems generally agitated with me all the time. I said, have you guys had any big issues or challenges that's caused this agitation in your mind? She said, no, sir. I said, what about you, sir? He said, no, I don't think so. He said, as far as I'm concerned, this just feels like normal behavior. As far as I'm concerned, I said, so your inability to talk is normal to you? You admit that? He said, yes, sir. He said, I've always been that way. I've never been a big talker. I've never been a big person to spend a lot of time conversing about things. I just haven't. I've just been more of a doer. And when she met me as a man, I was a doer. I wasn't a talker. I wasn't a problem solver. I wasn't those things. I said, ma'am, is that true? She said, yes, sir. He's telling the truth. I can't lie about that. That's how I met him. But my hope was that he would evolve over time. And she said, I'll take it a step further. I have this just fear that if he doesn't open up, if he doesn't start to engage with me and learn how to properly communicate with me, that I'm just going to get exhausted with this entire situation and not want to even be in this marriage anymore. I said, ma'am, it is his mental exhaustion and perhaps the fear of being open that's keeping him from opening up. I said, but we just need to dive into it. I looked at him and said, sir, I have 2 big questions for you. I want you to be honest. I said, number one, have you ever cheated on your wife? He said, no, sir, I haven't. He said, why are you asking me that? I said, well, I'm not suggesting that you have, but just in my experience, a lot of times when people are just cold with their partners, a lot of times infidelity is at the core. Not all the time, but this is just helping me to understand maybe what the root cause is. He said, no, sir, I've never cheated on her. I never even had thoughts of cheating on her. I said, well, that's good. I said, 2, do you know your attachment style? He said, not really. He said, I just know how I was raised. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in essence, anytime my parents had to deal with anything, address anything, my dad would always look at my mom and just say to her, hey, do whatever you want to do. Do whatever it needs, to happen. If something needs to be fixed, he would give her money and say, hey, call whoever you need to call. If something was wrong with me or my siblings and it needed to be addressed, she would call and tell him. And maybe he would be at home, maybe he wouldn't be. And he would say to her, well, just go ahead and, just take care of it, handle it. I said, that's pretty much how you were raised? He said, yes, sir. I said, so it sounds like then you married your mom and became your dad. Is that fair? He paused. He kind of smiled and grinned and put his head down and said, I guess I never looked at it like that. I've never really studied attachment styles. He said, but, my wife was telling me that you said that they're born in our childhood and how we're raised. Maybe that's what it is. I said, sir, that's what it feels like. This is not anything to be ashamed about as long as once we are aware of it, we are willing to do something about it. She then interjected and said, Doc, I will admit he's very affectionate. He's a very affectionate guy. He's a giver. He's very generous. And because he does this and loves me this way, it makes me feel like he is capable of making changes. Am I wrong about that? Because it kind of confuses me. I said, how do you give affection? And he said, well, I give it as attention to my wife. And when I give it, I just give it. I said, do you have to ask for it? I said, no, I don't have to ask for it. She looked at him and said, you don't have to ask? I kind of laughed and chuckled on the call. He said, no, I didn't mean it like that. He said, I meant it in the sense of it's not something I had to ask for. You give it to me willingly. I said, so, sir, have you ever had to ask her for any level of affection? Since you're, such a giver, you're very affectionate, any attention, care, things like that. He said, yeah, there have been times I've asked her. I said, you have? He said, I have. I said, so if you can ask for that, why can't you talk about problems? If you can ask for affection, if you can ask for attention, why can't you talk about the problems that you all have? I said, I want to say this to you, that your affection has become a defense mechanism that's really shielding you from deeper forms of intimacy. And a lot of times when people are avoidants, they will lean on affection as a way of not having to get too deeply intimate with someone, because that deeper level of intimacy causes them to have to address their fears. And this is where you are. I said, and sir, two of the deepest forms of intimacy are accountability and responsibility. I said, do you know the difference? He said, no. He said, I pretty much, like most people, probably just use the words interchangeably. I said, that's fair. Being accountable for something means being connected enough to resolve it. Being accountable for something means being connected enough to resolve it. Being responsible for something means that you have a direct obligation to solve it. So you can be accountable for something, but not be directly responsible for it. You're just close enough to it that you do have the ability to resolve it. But when you are responsible for something, you have a direct obligation to resolve it. I said, why is this important in the context of your attachment style? Because when you're accountable and responsible, then you recognize you got to go deeper than the surface. And sexual affection, or affection in general, is surface. It's nice, but it's surface. And it does not address the real issues that an avoidant would have that's causing them to stay away from the deeper things that they need to get into, like their fears. I said, you all understand that operating on the surface won't help, correct? They both said yes. They had said to me earlier on the call that they were unpacking because they just bought a new home. And in the process of unpacking, we're talking about just, we were small talking, and they were talking about how they were going through the home to clean out different areas. I said, when you guys were cleaning out a closet, one of your closets, I said, did you have any junky areas or closets or anything? She chimed in and said, yeah, doc, we had a very junky closet in the office space, and it took us some time to do it. And I asked him to help. I said, perfect. I said, how'd that go? He said, well, we worked through it. We worked through it and got it done. I said, what if you would have asked him to clean through that closet, and he would have said to you, you guys, after 10 minutes in, you know what, I'm tired. I don't want to go any deeper than this. We've done enough. What would your response have been? She said, I'd been upset. I said, why? She said, because we have more work to do. Like, clearly, if the closet isn't clean, then why are you stopping? I said, ma'am and sir, this is what it looks like when an avoidant is addressed with issues. The issues in their life is the junky closet. And when you ask them to attack it, what happens is they'll do a little bit. They'll do something. But when they feel like they have to deep clean and get deeply involved in correcting that closet space, they get to a place where their panic and their fears overtake them. Maybe even anxiety overtakes them, and they don't want to go deeper. And so what do? He said, they back out. I said, sir, this is what we're dealing with right here. I said, sir, you have to get beyond the surface level of things in your life so that you can get a healthy relationship with detail. And you can get a healthy relationship with going deeper, because it's going to require detail and going deeper to be able to have a positive communication style with your wife to be able to resolve problems. I said, does that make sense? He said, it does. I said, there's another consideration I want you to have, sir. And I want to be very honest with you about this. I said, have either of you ever been bungee jumping? They said, no. I said, perfect. I haven't either. It's on my bucket list. I said, but if you two decided, let's say, to go bungee jumping, and you're going to jump off of a bridge, and you had to meet at the bottom of the bridge, and then you walked all the way to the top of the bridge after you paid your money at the bottom, and you got to the top of the bridge, and then you paid the attendant your money, and then they put the harness on you, and then you, sir, decided, I don't want to do it. I said, how do you think your wife is going to respond? He said, well, given my wife and how understanding she is, I don't think she would be upset. I said, probably not. Not the first time. Not at all. She probably just jumped. I said, or she may just turn around because she wants to stay with you and walk back down the bridge, back down to the bottom. She said, Doc, I would do that. I said, perfect. I said, so one time, no big deal. I said, so let's just say again, y'all try 2 weeks later. Go through the same process. You decide at the bottom of the bridge that you want to do it. You walk up to the top, you pay your money, you put on your harness, and you're getting ready to jump, man, but then he decides, I don't want to do this. I said, how are you going to feel then? She said, I'm probably going to start to feel a kind of way. I said, why? She said, because we're getting all the way up to the point where we can jump, but then he's changing his mind. He's backing out. I said, what are you going to do? She said, I may walk back with him. I said, perfect. Let's say y'all do this 3 times and you walk all the way to the top of the mountain. And then all of a sudden, pay your money, put your harness on. He decides he doesn't want to do it again. I said, what might you do? She started laughing and said, Doc, I'm going to jump off that bridge. I said, why? She said, because I've had enough of going backwards. I said, sir, let me say this to you. If you don't fix your attachment style, if you don't fix this avoidance and wanting to go deeper, even the person that is connected to you, that is demonstrated the strength and the patience to help you and wait on you to go deeper, eventually they get tired and they decide, as it relates to this marriage, they're going to jump anyway. I said, you have to fix this avoidance that you're dealing with. And you've got to recognize that talking and communicating deeply is a sign of functioning in a secure space. I'm not talking about talking deeply and screaming and yelling and kicking and screaming, but I'm talking about talking deeply in a reasonable way. It is a sign of secure attachment. And you need to get to that place if you're going to resolve this marriage. He was very thankful, very open to the feedback. They have done 4 sessions since then. He's working hard to adjust his attachment style. She recognized through the work that we're doing together that she is a little bit more anxious than what she's like. So she's making some adjustments, and I think they're going to be okay. I hope this story made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.